possibility that we might default on our debt, and, of course, the world financial crisis that would be tied to that as it fell out. We haven't even begun to talk about particular challenges in our own community or in our own congregation or perhaps in your own household. Looking at these dimensions of your life, you might wonder, there you go. I wondered what happened to me. Looking at those, did you hear all the first part? Oh, good. Okay, good. I have a big mouth, so that works well. Looking at all the dimensions of your life, you might wonder why I would call for thanksgiving. Why not a call for lament? Or why, you might turn that down a little bit. A call for justice. A call for action. Wouldn't a lament be a little more appropriate with what's going on? Or cry for justice? Or maybe some stirring up to good social action? Certainly those are possibilities, and certainly they have a place and they have a time in which we might do those things. But just now, given our reading for today, I'm reminded that of all the responses to events, blessed or challenging, great or small, one of the most powerful ways that we can respond to things around us, and often the most overlooked way, is that of thanksgiving, is that of gratitude. And my premise is, as I've lived with this text throughout the last couple of weeks, particularly this last week, is that gratitude has a transforming kind of power. In the passage before us from Luke, we have lepers today. We always seem to get the passage of Naaman together with whatever leper we encounter in the gospel. It's always Naaman in this first lesson. What a great story that one is. And yes, it was cut a little bit. There was a letter sent between the kings, and that's what's referenced when we pick up the passage. So go back and take a look at that. It's a great one about faith in small things in the dirty creek known as the Jordan versus the great rivers of Damascus. But we're now with Jesus in a borderland between Samaria and Galilee. We know that in Samaria are those people called Samaritans. And Samaritans essentially are folks who had come into the land around the exile or were left in the land, and their form of Judaism sort of diverged from those of the exile. And so when the Jews who had sort of encapsulated their particular form of Judaism came back, they found this variant form of Judaism that was being practiced, formed in holy places found in Samaria, not in Jerusalem, and it had changed over the generations of separation, along with the fact that people had interbred with people who had been relocated into that part of the kingdom. So it was sort of a half-breed, changed version of Judaism, and there became like sort of the Hatfields and McCoys, who became not kissing cousins, but warring cousins. So by the time that we arrive in the first century, at the time of Jesus, these people have really difficult times with one another and consider themselves, each other, untrustworthy. So Jesus is in this borderland between Galilee, where the Jews were, and Samaria, where the Samaritans were found, going again where he shouldn't go, among people that he shouldn't be hanging out with. That seems to be a theme in Jesus' life. This time he runs into a group of 10 lepers, people subject to any variety of skin disorders that are laid out in Leviticus 13 and 14 for any budding dermatologist. Knock yourself out. Today we call, there's still a form of leprosy that we've changed the name from leprosy to Hansen's disease. It's not a skin disorder, it's actually a nerve disorder. It's a completely different idea. But people in those days with these conditions were unclean. They were outcasts. They had to live either isolated or in communes of like-afflicted folks. And they had to make their presence known in public by acknowledging that they perhaps had a contagion. Sort of maybe how we felt in the early days of the AIDS epidemic. Not sure what's causing it, but we know that it's something we don't want to have, and so we just isolate as much as possible. That's what's going on with lepers. And why they approach it says, at a distance, and cry out at a distance to Jesus. That was what was expected of them. This plea is in some ways mitigated on the rules, but also the expectations that they've experienced among other people who keep pushing them further and further out from society. And in response, Jesus tells them, instructs them to go show themselves to the priest. According to Leviticus, that was the only official cure, was to show yourself to the priest, and if you were deemed clean, you could re-enter society, go back to your household, and come back to the synagogue or to temple. The implication, of course, is that somewhere along the way they would be healed so that by the time they reached the priest, they could be reincorporated into community. But on the way, one of them sees. We don't know what it is that exactly sees, but he notices that he's been healed. And he turns back to Jesus, and he's partying. Says, it's so polite, cries out with a loud voice, praising God. I think he's probably dancing back up the path. He's probably so excited he can hardly contain himself. This disease that has had implications that we cannot even begin to imagine is now undone. And instead of following the full prescription of Jesus, he turns back to Jesus and he worships. It says he throws himself at the feet of Jesus, praising God and thanks Jesus for this action. Now, there are 9 other people who we presume were healed. They continued to follow the instructions of Jesus. And we follow this one, and sometimes we think, based on the conversation with the one, that the other 9 had done something wrong. In fact, they didn't. We just don't know what happened to the other 9. We can presume that they went to the priest, and the priest proved that they were clean, and they then did whatever dancing in the aisles that they probably did as they made their way back into their lives. All we hear is about this one. The other 9 didn't do anything wrong. We just hear about this one, and this one gets lifted up in such a way that we sometimes think maybe the other 9 weren't healed, but that's not the case. We lift up this one of the 10 because he gets a second blessing, as I mentioned to the kids. The one who turns back, who is recognized by Jesus, is affirmed because he sees his healing and he responds with gratitude. And that gratitude is a second blessing. Blessed a second time. What does that mean? Was he not made well like the others? Indeed he was. But Jesus includes his exchange with this guy by inviting him to rise and go on his way. And it says, because his faith has made him well. The word that's used there is sozo, which is a word that often is translated as salvation. The word salvation, we get the word salve from, and you put salve on things to be made well. So the translation that we have in the NRSV is, he was made well. He was saved. He was made whole. The implications of that complex word, of course, can ring around interpretations of how we see this passage. And this man, he was a Samaritan. Wow. So what did the man receive? Certainly the blessing of healing. That's what all 10 received. But also the blessing that comes from recognize the blessing and giving thanks. The blessing that is wholeness and even salvation. Have you ever noticed just how powerful it is not only to receive a blessing, but to name it and then give thanks for it? Maybe you're at a dinner, maybe you're at supper's 8, and it's just one of those kairos moments, not where time goes chronologically second by second, but you kind of get swept up in the moment. It's a wonderful meal, it's a wonderful gathering of people, it's just a wonderful evening. The meal was prepared so deliberately and eaten so deliberately, and our conversations seem to be so deliberate, and there's just something that caught up in it. And in that moment, you suddenly see it, and you realize it, and you lift your glass to toast. You say, this is great. This time, this meal, all of you, thank you. And in the seeing and in the giving thanks, the original blessing of the meal and the fellowship becomes multiplied a second time. Or maybe you're at the Grand Canyon, or you're some picturesque spot, taking in the beauty of the vista that's before you, and you get caught up in that moment, and you lean over to your companion and you say, this is so beautiful. I'm just so glad that you're here with me to share in it. And again, the blessing is multiplied, and you've been blessed a second time by the vista and the expression or articulation of the gratitude about it. Thanksgiving is like that, isn't it? It springs from perception, our ability to recognize that we've been blessed, and then articulation, giving expression, no matter how inadequate it might seem at the time, of our gratitude for that original blessing. And then every time these two are combined, sight or perception and word or articulation, there grows a second blessing. Get it? Gratitude has transformative power. Gratitude draws us out of ourselves into something larger, something bigger, something grander than we could have ever imagined, and it joins us to the font of blessing itself. But maybe, just maybe, gratitude is one of the most powerful emotions that we can have. Gratitude frees us from fear, releases us from anxiety, emboldens us to do more and to dare more than we would have ever done when we began. Even to return to a Jewish rabbi, to worship this Jewish rabbi when you're a Samaritan, because you realize that you're more than a Samaritan. You're more than a leper. You're more than a healed leper. That you are, because of this gift, a child of God, whole and accepted and beautiful just as you are. And that's what the 9 missed. It's not that they did anything wrong. In fact, they were more legalistic about what Jesus said, perhaps, than the guy who turned away. It's that they didn't see the good fortune and didn't voice their blessing and missed out on allowing that blessing to be multiplied. Only the one who was able to receive the second blessing knew the transformative power of gratitude. I want you to think about that for a little bit. What does gratitude do to you? I've told you before the story of a friend of mine who was going through divorce, and it was devastating to them. Believed that it was just going to financially just ruin her. And she began to listen to a tape on gratitude by a new agey person called Louise L. Hay. Some of you might know her. She's been around for a long time. And it was a gratitude blessing. Every morning this is how long ago it is, she had to put the cassette in. At least it wasn't an 8-track. And before she got out of bed, she'd turn this on and she would listen to it. She'd describe it to me. And it was thanking everything that she had. Thank the blankets for laying so still at night to keep her warm. Thank the bed for holding her up. The structure of the bed itself that was so strong that it would just hold me without knowing it was there. Thanking her slippers for waiting patiently under the bed. Thanking her for the floorboards and the carpet that kept her feet warm. I kind of checked out somewhere around the time she went into the bathroom, and she's thanking the towel bar for holding her towel. It sort of just had too much schmaltzy schmack to me to make any difference, but I can tell you one thing, that listening to that tape changed this woman's life. And she moved from fear and anxiety into new life. Even God can use weirdos like Louise L. Hay, or Craig Beeker, or you. Transformative power of gratitude. In my 20s, I went through that experience that many people do called individuation, which is basically hell for your parents, because you push back from them and you have to define yourself into anti-relationship with what they were and what they are in order to establish who you are. And it's often exceedingly painful for your parents, and it was exceedingly painful for me. And what moved me beyond it was gratitude. I was living in the moment of what my parents were not, and it was really aggravating. And it became an issue for me. Living in what they were not became a pain for me. And it was when I began to recall what it was that they were, the gifts that they could give, and accepting the fact that what I didn't get was not my limitation, but theirs and their grief. And I began to see them in a whole new way, shaped and transformed by one simple thing: gratitude. Gratitude has transformative power. It is that one principle that we come in here to give every Sunday morning. To sit in rows and to read ancient words and to sing songs that sometimes are familiar and bring us to tears, and other times are so unfamiliar that they also bring us to tears for other reasons. But at the heart of it, at the center of it, at the fulcrum is that our lives are tethered to God by our willingness to be grateful for the gift that we have. And when we can see the gift, we are blessed. And when we can articulate the gift, it becomes not just our blessing, but a blessing for those who are around us. So let's look again at our world. Filled with troubles? Of course. But also filled with blessings. Families that care for each other, colleagues who work hard and work well, schools where teachers care about their pupils and try to teach them the things that they need to learn. And there are in those schools eager learners among the others. A form of government that is far from perfect and yet strives to honor its citizens by conveying a level of freedom and opportunity that's rarely imagined in the world. Relief agencies that tend the afflicted, service people who regularly put their lives on the line for complete strangers here and abroad. Good neighbors who support you and irritate you with the colors of their houses. A community of faith where we can hear God's word and be reminded that we're more than Samaritan, that we're more than broken leper, that we're more than healed person, but at the fulcrum, at the very hitch of our lives, is the fact that we are God's child and that nothing can change it because it's God's gift to us. And so we are nourished, we're fed, we're healed, we're restored, we're broken, and in that brokenness, perfection arrives. Not how we expected it or perhaps how we hoped it would be, but the way in which God brings it to us. The world is full of blessings and challenges. The question of our text is, which one are you going to focus on? Truth be told, there's a time for lament, there's a time to cry for justice, and there's a time for activism. But given the culture in which we live in, that just seems to be full of blame and full of accusation and almost devoid of thanksgiving, I think there's an opportunity for us, church, to be the countercultural herald, if you will, of God's good news, of God's powerful words of gratitude, and this way to experience not just blessings in this life, but the second blessing of seeing and articulating, and also to share then that transformative power of faith, this faith-based gratitude with a world that I think desperately needs it. So let's look on the sunny side, I guess, folks. Let's fight hard for tough-minded optimism, because we are not people of a sad world. We're people of a world redeemed. We're people of a world that God invades. We're people who are not left to our own devices, but are infused with the hope of the gospel and the blessing of all that is given to every person, and the opportunity as people of faith to multiply and to receive a second blessing. May we be courageous to allow gratitude to transform us. Amen.